everyone. So, I need to start with an apology. That's right, it's my apology video debut. It's not anything actually serious. I just need to apologize because this is not the video about HBO's Rome that I promised. This is in fact a video about something completely different. Look, the reason that this is happening is because the truth is that writing a very, very, very big video about a very, very big TV series takes time. And it turns out I've not had an awful lot of that between recording the other very, very big video that's coming out on Saturday, after this, hopefully, and just everything else, like having a job and shit like that. So, look, it's not malicious on my part. I'm aware it's not the HBO Rome video. We're just going to have to make our peace with it. But to sort of move on to the topic at hand, it's happened again. Elon Musk has blown up another rocket, and weirdos are defending him. And that would be so easy to talk about, but it's not what we're talking about today. I want to talk about another thing that he appears to be blowing up. And he's also somehow with both being defended by weirdos for the act of doing so, which is his ownership of Twitter.com. Look, Elon Musk is a polarizing figure, but I think one thing everyone can agree on is his public behavior seems to be obsessed with social media and with Twitter and with meme culture and things that a person of 50 years old, good that he's, trying to connect with his youth or his inner child, perhaps in more ways than one, but, maybe a little unbecoming of the world's richest man to be this obsessed by it. His specific obsession with Twitter is actually really interesting because Twitter is a relatively small social media, particularly in the American context, and it has a user base that was already slightly on the decline before he went and overpaid by a significant amount for it. First of all, as an aside, that says something about the outsized power or impact or perceived power that Twitter has, because I think a lot of that is to do with who the users are, as opposed to anything about the sheer volume of users as you would expect in, say, TikTok, which is so much more popular than Twitter, that it's kind of terrifying as someone who somewhat ironically hates doing video stuff sometimes, even though I do video stuff all the time. So what do I want to go over in this video? I want to make an evaluation of the period leading up to and then the ownership of Twitter by Elon Musk itself. I want to talk about the big changes he made to the site, like with Twitter Blue and verification, and how his poor decision making has undermined what might actually have been an interesting idea that might actually have had some use cases that could have been relevant to people kind of like me. Alongside that, I want to evaluate what Musk might have actually understood about Twitter and about social media, because I've said in the past, on Twitter, ironically, and in probably some other videos, that I don't think he understands the business model of Twitter, but I think I was slightly wrong about that. I think he's understood part of it, but because it's a complete understanding, he's basically shat the bed, for want of a better term. And I want to also go over how he's made the website not just pay to lose, which is in itself kind of an interesting feat to have achieved. I also want to explore how he's managed to create a situation where he's basically upset every bit of the user base, including the part of the user base that is paying for his service. So that's what we're going to do. There'll be timestamps in the description if you want to skip any particular section, but we're just going to dive right into it with Elon Musk's ownership of Twitter and what led to it. It's important for us to go over some background really quickly. So why did one of the richest people in the world want to buy a social media website with a declining user base that everyone who uses it calls a hell site? Well, one part of it is that he's what we might call a power user. Even before his takeover, for a person with so many assets and presumably infinite resources for leisure, he spent an awful lot of time on Twitter, stealing memes, getting into it with randos, expressing opinions, and generally seeming to have a pretty okay time of it. I mean, It wasn't great, but it didn't feel like he was out there to ruin anyone else's time with it. He was just ruining his own time with it, and also being extremely divorced, which... As we'll see, Elon Musk perhaps failed to consider something quite important though, which is that there's a significant difference between being a prolific user and being the owner. A lot like going from a regular poster in an old forum to becoming the admin. Suddenly every single issue is not only your problem, but if those issues linger, people will be very quick to blame you, which sucks, but in this case some of these issues may well have actually been his fault, which we'll see. He made an unsolicited offer of $44 billion to buy the website, which, if we're being honest, is probably about $44 billion too much. He then tries to worm his way out of the deal, but was eventually compelled to buy it. For context, $44 billion is on the order of magnitude of some countries' GDP. It's an impossibly huge amount of money to think of. Go ahead, just try and imagine $44 billion and what you could do with $44 billion, right? It's huge. Your mind literally cannot conceive of this number, right? But think of this as well. He largely financed it through credit, which is an incredibly risky thing to do, but it also just sort of proves the point that money is only really real for poor people. Elon Musk also went on about why he was buying the site, or at least he offered us a set of reasons that he said in public that weren't, "I've whipped my fan base into a frenzy and people would be disappointed by anything less." His reasoning was that he wanted to make changes to the platform, largely based on what I think is a misunderstanding of what the platform is and what the obligations of a social media website are. So let's just try and go through some of the key ones step by step and see whether he's managed to achieve what he wanted and how that might clash with some of the obligations of a site like this. So one of Elon Musk's publicly stated goals was to promote free speech, and I feel like we have to do this every time someone mentions free speech, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is, what free speech did Elon Musk think was being impeded? Because I've had some pretty nasty and false things said about me on Twitter that resulted in harassment across multiple websites. And under the old regime before Elon Musk, that was permissible speech. So speech seems pretty free to me, or at least about me, on the website. Now, it's not about me, obviously. I just wanted to throw that in there for colour. But it is interesting to me to imagine what speech he believes is being impeded. And I think the partial answer to that question lies in who the moderation still targets. So this is an issue that predates Elon Musk, but it seems to have gotten worse. I've seen instances where transphobes are outright calling trans people and their supporters groomers. If you're a free speech absolutist and you want your platform to reflect that, then I think that's bad. Not just for users, but for the platform as a whole. Nonetheless, that's the platform's choice. However, if people targeted with that rhetoric, that abusive rhetoric, I think we'd agree, tells their abusers to fuck off, or anything slightly more harsh than that, then the moderation hammer tends to come down on them, which is interesting, right? It feels like it's less about promoting free speech and more about revenge restrictions on groups that Elon Musk and perhaps the moderation team at Twitter feel like are having excesses in free speech and probably existing in public, if we're being direct and honest about it. Then we come to the great unbanning. A lot like the BBC, if you ask any political group, they'll say Twitter is biased against them, and there are varying degrees of validity to that, right? Were the right being censored by Twitter? Probably not. But then I don't particularly give a shit about the censorship of right-wingers. But the fact that Elon Musk unbanned Donald Trump, who rather hilariously refused to come back, and this is something that I think is an important point to make here, which is that in relation to the obligations of a social media platform, Twitter is required by the law in some countries to ban certain material. For example, in Germany, material that promotes far-right political rhetoric and goals is not allowed to be displayed. You can report material for being illegal in Germany. which, you know, I would say definitely qualifies in a lot of these cases. But that was an aside, I'm getting distracted here. Some of the people who Elon Musk also brought back, let's just list some off. The notorious transphobe Graham Linehan, the meat coma enjoyer Jordan Peterson, the notorious misogynist and alleged sex trafficker and just all-round piece of shit Andrew Tate, and the British far-right group Britain First. It does rather paint a picture of what speech he thinks was unfairly suppressed and what speech he's happy to host on his platform. Is that good for the business of Twitter? Well, we might go into that in a little bit, in a more specific way, but I think most advertisers, as has been sort of demonstrated by the decline in advertising revenue, they're not going to be very keen to see their adverts next to content like that. Another fixation of Elon Musk's came up when he was trying to weasel his way out of buying the website, which is spam bots. I don't know why I said that in such a flamboyant way. Spam bots. Anyway, look, this is something that is actually a problem for a social media site. You don't want people being duped or scammed by bots. It's just not good for business, right? Elon Musk claimed that as much as 20% of the user base were fake or spam bots. Now, it turns out that may not have been strictly accurate. Shocking, I know, but one of the things that I'll note is that once he took over, I got a lot more spam messages in my message requests than I had before. So, you know, another bit of Elon Musk competence, I guess. No. So how did Elon Musk try to tackle this? Well, he claimed that they were deleting 1.5 billion accounts that were inactive, which is good. That frees up usernames. That's not a bad thing. He then followed it up with making the API, or access to the API, cost money. For people who don't know what this is, it's not actually terribly important, but basically what it did was it got rid of a lot of actually useful bot accounts and funny bot accounts, which has made the user experience probably a bit, if not worse, a lot more boring. He also wanted to make things like its recommendation algorithm open source, which on the face of it is not a bad thing. And while the algorithm for the For You page, which is a thing we'll get onto a bit later, was released, it lacks a lot of the important context that would make it actually meaningfully transparent. That being said, it is at least kind of interesting that he did it, so it's kind of growth on Elon Musk's part to be interesting, I guess, so, you know, fair enough. But I will say that this fixation with the algorithm is what fed into his experiment with engagement levels, you know, when he made his account private and posted stuff to see how many people engaged with it, which did lead to the very funny, very, very, very funny, I kind of can't, believe this is a real thing, where he was told by one of Twitter's engineers that the decline in engagement, or the lack of the correct level of engagement he was expecting, was because public interest in him had declined, and then he fired the person who pointed out that the public interest in him had declined, which some might say colours the motivations he states for actually buying the website and makes it look like he did the whole thing to just feel cool and popular. I'm not saying he did it for that reason, but it begins to paint a little bit of a picture, and it does kind of become a recurring theme in the saga ahead of us. But setting that to one side, I need to talk about one very important thing that Elon Musk did early on in his tenure as owner. He fired a lot of people. This started with firing top executives, which, you know, I'm not going to cry about top executives getting fired. They're going to be okay, you know, and I get it. You want to bring your own people in. Whatever. You know, you can dislike Elon Musk for a lot of things. I feel like this is one of those things where I'm like, you know, you fired a bunch of rich people, who gives a shit? He then goes on to fire about 50% of Twitter's workforce with dubious compliance with various jurisdictions' labor laws. And if reports are to be believed, he used the metric of how many lines of code people had written as one of the deciding factors in who got fired and who didn't. Now, this is an aside from someone who maybe has a little bit of an idea of what they're talking about. If you've noticed that Twitter is running a little less well than it did before his acquisition, I would suggest that this firing of people is partially responsible. I can understand a non-technical person coming up and saying, okay, lines of code, that equals productivity. I completely understand why a non-technical person, someone without a background in this, would sort of understand that, right? It's just that if you're supposedly the super genius who's going to take us to Mars, I would suspect that you either know, or have access to someone who knows, that at best this is a super crude metric. More doesn't necessarily mean better in the world of coding. In fact, to be honest, more might well mean worse in the world of coding. It's context dependent, but if they're writing more lines of code to do the same thing, they are a worse coder. It's just, again, it's still a little crude, but that's the basic metric that you need to understand. And there's a whole video to be done, probably by me at some point, that's a defense of people who are perceived as slackers. But as a sort of taster for that video, let me say that people who are perceived as slackers tend to know how to get things done because they have what's known as institutional knowledge. And institutional knowledge is very difficult to replace. The thing with Twitter is, as with any live piece of software, is that problems will accumulate. And speaking as someone whose day job it is to test software, it's helpful to have a developer who knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak, who can quickly just go in, fix it, allow us to retest it, and give it the all clear. Twitter has essentially removed a significant portion of the people who a tester would go to solve these problems. And it's part of the reason why it's decaying. It's part of the reason why the user experience is degrading over time. It's not the mechanical reason behind the site becoming pay to lose, as I put it, but the pay to lose and the degrading user experience, they're both symptoms with the same cause. I think that's enough information for us to return to those new features he wanted to implement. Press reporting of his ambitions are always a little unrealistic to me, so I want to focus on what he's actually introduced and what impact they're having. So let's start with something I actually think is quite good, right? Shocking, I know. But apparently it was a feature that was in development before Elon Musk took over, which is community notes. But good for Elon Musk for letting it actually happen. So community notes are basically little things that you see on the bottom of tweets that provide context to controversial claims, or that's at least the intent. Gotta move a bit of my hair out of my face. They have the funny side effect of things like the Labour Party having community notes added to their bullshit campaigning in the local elections, where they keep saying, oh, we'll do this thing, and it turns out local governments don't do that. I'll round up a bit later about what this might mean that Elon Musk actually understood about the platform itself, but I'm also aware that I might be giving him a little too much credit if I say he's understood something because of this. Still, I'd say because it leads to the funny things that I described, it's probably mostly fine. This is not a great crime on Elon Musk's part. Moving on to things that might actually cause some trouble. It's a small thing, but now Twitter shows you the number of views or impressions that your tweet gets. And this is the kind of thing that very, very few people need to care about. Look, if you're in an online community that you enjoy interacting with, then the number of views isn't that relevant, right? It's not the metric by which your enjoyment occurs. If you're a content creator, fine, maybe it matters. If you're a person with a persecution complex about how the algorithm is treating you on a social media website, well, this might actually go on to fuel more of it. And this change actually acts as a pretty serious accelerant for how Elon's changes made the site pay to lose, mainly because of the type of person who doesn't need to obsess about this metric, but really, really obsesses about it. Then we have the splitting of the home feed into For You and Following. Look, my For You was actually working quite well. I barely ever got stuff I didn't want. But the idea of only verified people showing up on it makes my skin crawl a little bit, and that has been a suggested, floated change to it. And look, it would make it functionally useless to me because no one whose opinion I give a shit about is a big enough loser to pay Elon Musk $8 or $11 or whatever the fuck it is, right? And look, all this change does is make something that's actually quite hard to find easier to find, because you could find your impressions analytics if you looked through it. So it actually could have been an improvement in actually making that easier to access, so long as following was actually somewhat chronological and for you wasn't a Trojan horse to try and soothe the egos of some of the biggest babies on the planet. That gives us a neat segue into the main event here, which is Elon Musk's changes to Twitter Blue. For those of you out of the know, Twitter Blue is an opt-in subscription service that provides you with additional features on top of the usual Twitter experience of just having the most insane shit funneled into your brain direct on your laptop or phone screen. The non-exhaustive list of the features are things like an edit button, which, whatever. I mean, there are definitely shenanigans you can do with an edit button, but from what I can tell, it does show you you can see the original version of a tweet, so those shenanigans are perhaps limited. Seeing half as many ads, which to me heavily implies that they're going to double the number of ads, but also advertisers are running away from the platform and apparently also need to have Twitter Blue to advertise on the platform, which I will say is a bit different from the traditional method of making money from advertisers, which is to sell them advertising space on a website that isn't full of whiny losers who are probably Nazis. That's just the content that's being promoted a lot of the time because of this, okay? The other things that it gives you are things like longer tweets, which defeats the purpose of the website to me. Again, this feels like a disconnect in the understanding of what makes the website work. Longer video uploads, actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I could definitely see an interesting use case for that. And the most important one is priority ranking in conversations and searches. So if you go on a big tweet, any old big tweet these days, and you look at the replies to it, at the very top of it, it's almost always someone with a blue tick next to their name. And the thing is that a lot of those people, their tweets suck. It's not, I'm being honest about it. Their tweets fucking suck. There's no way around it, I'm afraid. The other thing that it provides is that thing I mentioned, the infamous blue tick. Look, the blue tick was never really a respected symbol. I mean, there's the Wojak memes about blue ticks, and it doesn't really matter what bit of the political spectrum you're on and, you know, what internet subculture you belong to. Blue ticks are a figure of fun. And the thing is, what a blue tick actually was and what the utility of it was it was kind of like an inherited symbol of status from your, offline activities. You were a journalist, or you had been published by a, reputable outlet, or you were like a famous pop star or something like that. You were noteworthy, and part of the use of it was that it was to prevent impersonation of people who, you maybe don't want being impersonated on your platform. For example, you would not want a major corporation to be impersonated on your platform and for people to believe what the impersonator is saying, because they could say all sorts of bullshit and then it damages stocks, and then you are going to get sued. Like, you as the platform hosting it will probably get sued, and so will probably the person who is doing the impersonating, because that is not usually difficult to figure out. And so it can go very, very badly wrong. But the thing about the infamous blue tick is that it was always a symbol of a person who perhaps thought of themselves as better than other people. And let me tell you, opening it up to $8 or $11 or whatever the number is, whatever the number is as of release or whenever you're watching this, it has not diminished that quality. It's just changed the level of nastiness that the person seems to have, because now it's all of those people who you had to click show more tweets to see, who have the blue ticks and are getting more visible. You can imagine this is not making the experience radically better. Now I need to explain pay to win, and, just as a sort of counter to what Elon Musk has done, which is pay to lose. So pay to win mechanics are where it's quite simple. You can pay to win in a game, usually a game. So, for example, in games where you rely on luck-based drops for items and such, or in games that have some reliance on skill, but where equipment can make a difference, you can pay to get better equipment, or to advance more quickly, or to just, have the game experience sped up, because a lot of these games rely on basically what's called grinding, which is where you just keep going over and over and over and over again doing an action to try and reach a goal, or just drudgery. It's drudgery. It's hideous drudgery. So this move actually demonstrates some understanding of the mechanics behind social media that it deploys, particularly gamification. These are when you use game elements in something that isn't a game to make it more attractive. I did a whole video about it called POV You Are the Main Character. You should go check out that video. It is a very good video, probably my best video to date. Go check it out if you're so inclined. The thing is that what he's understood is that engagement is the name of the game. But what he's accidentally done is he's taken a symbol that is already mocked and managed to degrade it and take away any actual value it may have had. So just think about it like this. Elon Musk seems to enjoy, and this is me projecting something onto him, this is not necessarily true, he seems to enjoy negative interaction as much as positive interaction. And that's fine. That's actually probably not a hideously bad trait to have in a social media website, because especially when you're the richest person in the world, people are going to be mean to you. It's like when he went out on stage with Dave Chappelle and got booed. It's gonna happen, right? And he fucked up the "I'm rich" line. But anyway, it's not important. That's not the important thing here. The other thing that he's misunderstood is engagement beyond impressions on Twitter is largely voluntary. See, Twitter has curation tools, and will probably continue to have them. In fact, I've already seen people speculate that Elon Musk will make it impossible to mute or block blue ticks, which would be the nuclear option, but would actually demonstrate an even deeper understanding of the mechanisms at play. The thing is that curation tools mean that we can mute and block and generally phase out the people that we don't want to hear from. You see this in the form of the campaign #BlockTheBlue, right? And then Elon Musk started giving blue ticks to people like Drill, which, maybe made... We don't want to block Drill. We don't want to block Drill. His tweets are far too useful to my YouTube videos for me to block him. So, sadly, the blue has to stay for a little bit, at least some of it. And this all results in kind of sad exchanges where people haven't actually, in paying for the blue tick and for Twitter Blue, they haven't actually paid to win. I mean, just look at this exchange here. It's very sad, because these people assumed that their following and the commensurate increase in visibility that they get from Blue would result in more positive engagement, but it turns out they just don't tweet anything people like, which is really unfortunate for them. Fundamentally, this goes back to the changes he made earlier. The view count or impressions will drive these people insane. Like, Twitter isn't YouTube, right? Views and impressions do somewhat correlate with engagement, sure, but it's less direct than YouTube, where if I just show you an impressions graph versus a views graph for one of my videos, you'll see that the shapes of the curves are roughly similar. So if YouTube came out and said, hey, if you pay £5 a month, we will, guarantee that your video is seen, impressions wise by 20 to 30,000 people, which would be a significant increase for me at this point, then I would look at that and go, that's not necessarily the worst deal in the world. There's a use case there. Now, it happens to be there's a cost of living crisis on, so I probably wouldn't pay for YouTube Blue or whatever they would call the equivalent. And there are mechanical reasons behind this, so YouTube doesn't take 2 clicks for you to block someone, and the algorithm doesn't tend to throw you the content of people who aren't making content that others don't want to see, or at least others that are profiled as being similar to you don't want to see. And To be fair, that's speculation on my part, because the algorithm on this website is a bit like a capricious Mesopotamian deity. It will do as it pleases with the material that you provide it. What this has done is three main things. One is that it's provided an extra metric that will fuel paranoia about the algorithm, because impressions are not correlated strongly enough with engagement for it to make a big difference for people who are kind of mad about this sort of thing. He then attaches payment to a boost in the algorithm, which then puts content that people generally don't want to engage with in front of people, which means that the general user experience is worse. And it's made the experience of actually having the symbol of his product attached to your name even worse than it already was. Like, blue tick was not a symbol of respect before. Now it's even worse. And it's worth noting that people will still pay, though not enough to sort of make up the loss of income from advertisers and so on. And not enough celebrities and legacy blue ticks, if you will, did pay for it, which led to this particular group who did pay getting really, really angry about it, posing themselves as sort of anti-elitist because they paid $8 for something. And I get it, right? It's really, really aggravating when something is a status symbol and it's suddenly made accessible to you and the people who had the status no longer want it. That is aggravating. I get it. But have you considered that the service that you're getting is shit and that the website is degrading around you? Elon Musk eventually ended up returning legacy blue ticks, which is, you know, a pretty big L to take if you were asking me. But also, he did it while implying that these people paid for Twitter Blue, which might be illegal. I'm not sure if that's something that he's allowed to say, but I guess we'll find out at some point in the future. But all in all, Elon Musk has leveraged his incredibly partial and limited understanding of the dynamics of social media and made some key assumptions, and has produced a product that I actually think does have use cases. Like, I can imagine people that I know looking at Twitter Blue and going, yes, this is actually something that's useful to my business model, to the things that I want to do online, so I would pay for it. But the thing is, by pandering to the particular group who see it as a pay-to-win shortcut, he's rendered the use case totally irrelevant, since you'd actually net lose from subscribing because the association with it makes you look like a giant loser. And yeah, whew, that's enough of that for today, I think. Let's wrap it up. So, I want to thank you for watching. If you made it this far, thank you very much. Do remember to like and subscribe. I'm bad at doing these calls to action, so forgive my awkwardness. So like and subscribe. And also a special shout out to my patrons who really are really cool people, sticking by me through all of the content creator trials and tribulations. But a special shout out to Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kazli Scheider, John N, and SMD. They are the top tier subscribers. If you would like to get the videos a day early, at least one video a month early, if you would like to vote on the topic of videos, if you would like access to VIP areas in the Discord, the public link is down below in the description. It will be in the link tree link down there. Then you should come along and join, and make sure you head up to the Patreon. It is £1 for the lowest tier, and it really does go a long way to helping me make videos like this, where I'm a bit more shoot from the hip, and videos like the one coming out on Saturday, which involve costumes and locations and very detailed scripts. So be on the lookout for that one, everyone, and I will catch you next time.